Hello, our guest today is Paul Surapine, who is the conductor of the Claflin Hill Symphony Orchestra, whose 16th season begins tomorrow. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome.
Nice to see you guys.
Oh.
Thanks for having me on the show.
I can't believe you're 16 years old. Not
Neither
you,
can
but
I,
the orchestra.
actually. Yeah, I mean, it does creep up on you.
What's the age?
Before long, we'll be able to drive.
Well, halfway through the season.
Well, you have to get your learner's permit first.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Halfway
that's
through
what I
the
still
season?
have as a conductor, driving the orchestra.
There you go. Nuts, probably.
And
Partly.
let's see if I can get my R's correctly. Tomorrow is Rogues, Rascals, and Rapscallions?
Rascals, Rogues, and Rapscallions.
You ruined it again. It's
But it's all three of them, you know.
Okay.
Very rambunctious.
Featuring the music of?
Richard Strauss, German composer. Mozart, we're opening with his Don Giovanni Overture. And it actually came about because tomorrow, November 14th, is actually the American composer Aaron Copland's birthday. So when we had set the date and suddenly realized it's Aaron Copland's birthday, I mean, he passed several years ago, so he won't be there. But
what a bummer.
But, I
but
love
it's
his
still a
music.
nice date to celebrate. And so, you know, it was like, well, we should do something by Aaron Copland. And we haven't done any Copland in a couple of years now. So, so I thought, you know, which piece by Aaron Copland would I like to do? And one of my favorites is Billy the Kid, which was a ballet he wrote back in the 1940s for his friend Martha Graham, who was a famous ballet choreographer and director. And we had done Billy the Kid back, I think, in 2003. So it's long enough that most of the audience doesn't remember, and probably the orchestra forgot about it too. So it'll seem fresh, but it's a great ballet score, and you know, celebrates Billy the Kid, which was something of a rascal, and then that kind of brought about
the rogue?
whole.
Who's the rogue?
Well, I'd say probably Don Giovanni is definitely a
rapscallion?
rogue. Rapscallion would be Till Eulenspiegel, which is Richard Strauss's offering for the evening. The piece is called Till Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks, which is a huge, muscular, show-off vehicle for the orchestra. We did Strauss's tone poem, Death and Transfiguration, a number of years ago. He, by the way, in case people don't recognize who Richard Strauss is, he's the one who wrote Also Sprach Zarathustra, which is better known in the popular vernacular as the theme to 2001. So Till Eulenspiegel was like the village prankster who went around, you know, pulling jokes and pranks on the neighbors, you know, upsetting apple carts, pulling down laundry, stuff like that. And, you know, the tone poem depicts the story. As it goes along, finally the villagers kind of get a little tired of him and they decide to execute him. So there's a big scene at the end where, you know, he's
Don't give
he's
the
kinda
people in Milford
screaming,
ideas
you know,
now.
and crying. But at the end, the Till theme comes back, so you're kind of thinking, well, maybe he still is alive. You know, maybe the prankster spirit is still alive. So. So that's kind of how the program evolved, you know, starting from Aaron Copland and then thinking what other things kind of would fit on the same program. I kind of like to work in themes.
Yeah, I was going to say, now you have some things that are the same every year, like the holiday music, the symphony with the animals for children.
Right, the petting zoo.
The petting zoo.
And that's not
but
even the
how do you
same.
pick the themes? I'm just curious. Something strikes your fancy and you put it together?
I actually have to kind of wait for some kind of inspiration to come from above or something, you know? I mean, people ask me all the time, you know, starting midway through the ongoing season, you know, so what are you thinking about doing next year? And I really never have any idea. I mean, I've got ideas. I mean, there's lots of things. We have 300 years worth of symphony music to explore, and you know, we're only 16 years old, so we haven't even scratched the surface yet. But you know, for instance, along the way in the next couple of years, I'd like a return to doing some of the big symphonies. You know, we haven't done a Brahms symphony in a couple of years. I'd like to explore a Prokofiev, Serge Prokofiev symphony. But again, we're doing Serge Prokofiev this year, in fact, on the Romantic program in February. So, but, you know, sooner or later, some ideas of a piece that we haven't touched on yet comes to mind.
And
sometimes
then complementary things pop in. And
right, and then, you know, I'd like to build programming that has some kind of continuity or thread running through it in the evening, you know, as opposed to being just kind of eclectic. I look at other season programs from other orchestras sometimes, you know, and I think, geez, I mean, what's that program about? This thing doesn't fit with that thing. It'd be like, you know, going to, you know, a really fine restaurant and also bringing a bag from McDonald's with you. I mean, you know.
You don't do that?
No, we don't do that. I don't do that.
we serve breakfast all day now, so.
Yeah, you might, Al probably gets a snack on the way to the good restaurant, you know, just in case he.
Well, now, what I like about your symphony is its quality music, but it's more informal than going to
Other orchestras.
the Boston Symphony Orchestra. This is a true conversation I heard on Halloween, by the way. I'm at a friend's Halloween party, and a woman I met says to another woman there, "Do you want to join me at Claflin Hill's opening night?" The other woman says, "I don't really like to get dressed up to go to the symphony." And she goes, no, it's in Milford Town Hall. You can wear jeans.
Yeah, you
And the
can.
other woman said, "Oh, in that case, okay." And I'm sitting there going, true but not true. There is a dressy element, there is a jeans element, but it's what I would call informal classical. I mean, it's there for the people.
Exactly. I mean, and really that's,
It's also affordable, by the way.
well, all of these things. You know, I mean, I studied for 15 years, a long time ago, with a man in New York City who's, you know, renowned as one of the greatest clarinet teachers of the last 100 years. That man played a Broadway show every night, you know, twice on Sundays, twice on Wednesdays, through his career. I mean, 50 years as a Broadway musician. I learned a lot from that man. His name was Kalman Opperman, about programming, just about the whole idea of bringing people to music. I mean, you know, he was one of the great clarinet players of the last century. I mean, back in the day when they did classical orchestra radio broadcasts live on the radio, chamber music concerts, I mean, you name it, he could do that. But he always ended his day, no matter what he had done the rest of the day, you know, recording a cartoon soundtrack, playing a chamber music program, something, and then he ends up, you know, at the Palace Theater on Broadway, you know, at the end of the night. And, you know, he used to say to me, you know, number one, Broadway was once the working classes entertainment,
Right.
you know, that
Right.
it was designed to be egalitarian, entertaining, that a working guy could bring his wife and his two
before it
kids
got
to
up
the
to
show,
$300 a ticket.
go out for a bite to eat, and he didn't have to work for 4 months
Right.
Pay for
after
it.
that to pay for the outing. And I mean, this was back in the 80s. He's saying, you know, it's ridiculous now. It's even more ridiculous today.
$300 or $400
You know?
a ticket.
Oh, I know. I bought 2 tickets for my wife and I to go see a show in Boston. That's not even Broadway. I mean, it was a touring show from Broadway. You know, it was kind of a Christmas present. It was a show we liked the movie. It was Once. I don't know if you ever saw that movie,
Yes.
Once. Great movie, great music. And I mean, that ended up costing close to $600-700 by the time you were done. I mean, just the tickets alone were $450.
Well,
Go out to eat, parking.
what
I
I,
mean,
like, what
and
I like
we-
is though you're affordable, but I've long believed, you know, my parents were big symphony lovers in the greater New York City area, and they went when they could. So I grew up hearing classical music in my house. I personally never saw a symphony until I was 22 years old. And it blew me away because for the first time, I actually tell people I heard it. Because I watched the musicians coming in and out with their parts. They were within 15 feet of the seats
Exactly,
I had.
yeah.
And ever since then, I've jumped at the chance to go. because I really believe you can absorb it much better watching the musicians than playing a
Absolutely.
CD.
Live is always better. I mean,
and get an appreciation for things.
Well, just to that point, when I grew up in a situation where I also, believe it or not, I did play the violin when I was younger.
That I can't picture.
Yeah, yeah, me carrying a violin case was quite a show. Anyway, but I also was involved in music appreciation, and when I was in the 8th grade, I won a music appreciation contest. So I got you identify songs, you identify instruments, you did all that kind of stuff. So I was really into it when I was younger, and I got to go see some nice orchestra, some nice symphony stuff. When and it was in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis was a pretty good
well,
place.
they have a good orchestra.
Yeah, so I got to see that stuff, and I grew up in a household where my father liked all music. He liked Dixieland, he liked progressive jazz, he liked, classical guitar. I mean, the whole schmear. So I grew up listening to every possible kind of music you could listen to. So it was just one of those things. So music is really something I really enjoy, good music. And I must say, I've been a member of the symphony now for a while.
10 years,
Over
probably.
10, over 10 years.
Probably.
And it's constantly fantastic. You cannot, in my opinion, you couldn't go to Boston or anyplace else and hear any better music, quality music, than go to Milford Town Hall. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you.
I believe that truly.
But, I mean, all these things you just touched upon, when we started the orchestra 16 years ago, I mean, I have to confess, it was kind of a partly
Wing of the prayer.
selfish reason. I mean, I am a musician. I need to find work. I ended up creating work. And by the way, I was getting to know a whole lot of other great musicians.
Right.
Then they need to work. And we need to work where we live, not
Right.
because I got married, I moved up here from Connecticut, and for the first 10 years of our marriage, or 5, 6 years, I was still driving out to the Berkshires for things. I was driving to New York City.
Yeah.
And as I'm starting to get assimilated into the local scene and meeting other great musicians, and they're driving around, and I thought, we're all starting families. We should be sitting home playing this great stuff for our neighbors. Now,
And
And
I
then
think
you-
it's a great addition, by the way, to the
Without
Milford
question.
community.
Without
Well,
a question.
You've changed
Without
the town with that
well,
symphony.
and again, and I always say that this probably couldn't have come to pass in most other communities, but Milford is a unique community. I mean, I think it was almost like God directed your life, and you ended up in a town, because there has been 3 or 4. I call it sometimes rising of the culture over the last 100 years in Milford. Going back to the Italians that came to cut
Oh,
rock.
the Opera House.
The Opera
House, right.
House.
When you drive by Moran's
The
studio,
Stan Kenton period
Right.
with
Right.
Boots Mazzulli and Bob Varney and all those guys. I mean, Stan Kenton brought in Boots Mazzulli as his lead alto sax, and he brought some Milford guys. They were here all the time playing. When I actually moved to the area, there was a Greater Milford Symphony at the time. It was kind of going out of business right when I got here. I mean, they kind of, it was a noble effort, but I think they kind of went at it, kind of the wrong way. They just started an orchestra, whereas we started from the old Milford Concert Band, giving concerts in the park, developed it from there, started doing indoor educational concerts for families. The symphony almost was born by accident in 2000 as part of a contract I was doing for Worcester State College, and they were doing this big piece that I thought that would be a great way to launch a brand new orchestra. So that's kind of how Claflin Hill Symphony got underway. But, so number one, Milford was a fertile place for this to come to
definitely.
life again. It's also a great community that people welcome newcomers in. I mean, I feel like I lived here all my life. I have no past memory before Milford, in a sense. My kids grew up here. They're Milfordians. They went through the school system. All their, it's a almost land that time forgot kind of town. Where people stay here.
music is valued also.
And then,
And, well, it's also
valued.
the foundation is that the community was built on immigrants. And as a result, they brought that culture with them years and years ago.
Well, they brought their culture, and they also brought their sense of family.
And all that stuff fits. Milford is a unique community relative to the rest of Massachusetts. Very unique, I believe.
I think so. I mean, you know, I say this over and over, so I'm not like just, you know, trying to brown nose people in town. I mean, I just love this town. I love being a part of this town. I love that. I mean, I almost never, I teach out of town a couple days a week.
Right.
Other than that, I get out of my house and drive 20 seconds, I'm not a walker, to my office on Main Street. I'm around town all day long, you know.
I usually run into
just
you
came
somewhere.
back from the town hall, you know, setting things up for the concert. I mean, you know, but, so, the other thing is this. Aside from becoming an orchestra, and you know, that's great. We created some gigs for great musicians. We're doing something that's good for the community, but it's become a larger, like, you know, almost like sacred mission that, you know, like you grew up with music. You grew up with music. You know, kids are not growing up with music in the same way anymore. There are people like that lady who said, you know, well, I don't really like to go to the symphony because I have to get dressed up. You know, there's this perception now that that's for a certain, like, very limited tier of people, and I want to get rid of that.
Well, the other piece of the puzzle, too, is that, believe it or not, I believe technology has changed. It used to be, for example, I use watches as an example. It used to be that someone had a 21-jewel watch. It was
I know.
It was a mechanical, it
was a marvel.
Marvel.
A watch was a piece of
art.
It was
of
a
your
piece
dress.
Well, you
I
can
mean-
still buy a $20,000 watch.
Yeah,
so.
but I mean but now they have digital watches. You have watches that are, you know, you put a battery in them and they work great and all that kind of. So the technology.
Or most people don't even bother with a watch. They look at the time on their cell phone.
Well, that's younger kids, younger people do
I
that.
plead
I
guilty.
bought my kids watches, you know.
They don't wear them.
For Christmas. It's like, why aren't you wearing your watch? I don't know, you know. I
Yeah,
mean,
but-
watches are almost like wearing an ascot.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a
And I
very
like
good-
ascots,
That's
too,
a
by
very
the
good
way,
example. But I think music is the same way. It's become so simple, and you know, you can listen to it on your cell phone or whatever, that people don't appreciate the artist who performs the music. To
Well,
watch
and
and
that's-
enjoy. I was talking to my wife, for example. I said a violin, and I said, you realize that there are no frets on a violin. So when people play a violin, they have to know where their fingers go. There's no symbols, no signs, no.
No, nothing says put finger
But
here.
it's not like a guitar. There are no frets on it. So you have to train to be able to play that violin properly and get the right note. And I said, you know, that's the thing that we've lost the appreciation for, is that part of it, I think.
Well, and also because you can access music all the time, but you don't
Right.
see the people that made the music.
Right.
You know, and
Right.
when you're at a Claflin Hill Symphony concert, and again, you know, more uniqueness of Claflin Hill. One of our musicians actually did an interview on the station just a few weeks ago. It was a great interview. And he brought up a point on the show that he was talking to the audience, saying that, you know, Claflin Hill, because we sit on the floor at Town Hall, not on stage, or the stage
Right.
is too small for the orchestra, and so we sit in front of the stage on the floor, and the audience is right around us, and people in the side balconies are kind of sitting right over us.
Looking
you know?
down on.
And so there's this like the audience is right there amongst you.
Right.
People actually come into the orchestra during intermission or after the concert.
And talk to people.
And talk to the musicians, asking them questions, you know. I mean, they just wander around. I mean, could you imagine being in a symphony hall in Boston and walking up on the stage during intermission? I mean,
Oh, you wouldn't.
you get thrown out.
Or, quite honestly, the director is walking around,
Right.
talking to people and
Well, I
shooting
make,
the ball.
as you know, a point of, I get there early on the night of
Say
the concert.
hello to people and talk.
I used
and-
to help seat people and fuss with the programs, you know, and then my wife and all of her
Yes.
volunteer ladies finally told me I was not needed back
Well,
there at all.
but it's
You got in the
it's
way,
like I said,
probably.
it's an intimacy that you guys bring and
And
a
a personal
closeness that I don't feel like I'm going into an amphitheater of 1,000 seats, where I'm on the third tier in the balcony. I mean, even if I'm in the last row of Upper Town Hall, I'm still within 200 feet, 300 feet
Right.
of you guys?
It's very close. I mean, yeah, I mean,
That's-
it's probably not even 200 feet to the rear balcony.
And you
Right.
can detect almost every violin that plays, or every cello, or every French horn. You can hear that individual playing that
Yes.
music along when it goes. You hear the whole thing as it goes together, but you can almost hear that individual.
Although I want to confess, I actually wish you were raised up about a foot to 18 inches so you could actually see everybody.
Yeah,
because
that would
the
be
further
one
back you
thing.
go, some of you
That is
disappear.
probably the one drawback because, you know, the whole floor is one level flat.
You know, some
so
risers or
people
something
8 rows
to-
back
yeah.
really are not seeing the orchestra at all.
But the people in the front rows have
Right.
an unbelievable view.
And they're getting like blasted in the front
And the
row.
thing that amazes that as we've said before, I always try and bring someone new to the seats that we have. We have 4 seats, and I always try and bring someone new. And the look on people's face that have never been there before is just
Well,
fantastic.
and we get that all the time.
And they
I
say,
mean,
I
tomorrow night's concert, we have Medway Oil and Propane sponsoring, you know, and that's how this happens, you know, corporate sponsorships that we've built. So Home Field Credit Union is traditionally one of our sponsors on opening night from Grafton. Medway Oil and Propane, which is one of our largest corporate sponsors, Jeffrey Mushnick. And Milford Water Company has joined.
They have. That's great.
Yes.
That's great.
And the same thing. Mr. David White, the owner of the water company, R.H. White Companies, came to a concert last season in March, the Opera to Broadway program.
And probably said, wow.
And he I had lunch with him a couple weeks ago, and he said, I have to confess, you know, Tom Wesley invited me as his guest to come, and I you know, was almost like not looking forward to it. I figured it would probably be okay or kind of sketchy, but, you know, we were invited and we wanted to be polite. He said, and it blew my mind that this orchestra sounds this good
In Milford.
and is right here amongst us.
Absolutely.
And then we get that all the time. You know,
Well, it's not expected. It's almost expected, oh, a symphony in Milford, probably, you know, fifth string guys who couldn't cut it anywhere
The
else.
orchestra, actually, among orchestras around the region, you know, and I'm talking New England, is, you know, pretty much renowned among musicians now. I mean, we get a lot of people wanting to become part of Claflin Hill.
Really?
And the
Oh, that's
ones
great.
that are part of Claflin Hill are bugging me for the dates, you know, starting back in mid-season.
so they can plan on it.
Because they want to put this orchestra ahead of the other gigs that they also take. I mean, you
that's
may
great.
see some of our musicians at the Portland, Maine Symphony, or
Right.
Rhode Island Philharmonic in Providence, Indian Hill up in Littleton, Cape Symphony, Plymouth Philharmonic. I mean, you know, there's all these regional orchestras kind of on that level. And they're all fine orchestras. But there's something different about Claflin Hill. And, you know, again, the sacred mission thing, you know, we have to preserve a culture for our children, you know? I mean,
agree.
Technology is great, and in some ways it's been beneficial. I mean, you know, when my son Zach was, I don't know, like junior high school, early high school, you know, I realized that on his little iPad or iPod, whatever
iPod
those
back
things
then.
were, I never had one, but he had like 1,400 different pieces of music loaded in there. Everything from, you know, Herbie Hancock to,
Oh, man.
you know, The Doors to Beethoven to,
Ramsey Lewis.
you know, and he's a huge, like, Baroque music. I
Oh,
mean,
really?
he's majoring in music now at
Right.
UMass, about to give his senior recital.
Oh, great.
You know, his big thing, above all, he loves Bach and Baroque music, Vivaldi. He plays in the orchestra when he's around.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
You've
that's
seen
right.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
I
seen it.
personally, I
mean,
have.
He's
I-
actually even sung with the orchestra.
That's right.
You know, because
That's
he had a
right.
great voice all through high school.
Right, he did sing.
I probably have more trumpet music on my iPhone than most people believe exists
Yeah.
because I like fanfares and things like that. And when I find something, I quickly
You know,
acquire
there was a
it.
great recording years ago. It's probably still out there. It was a Gabrielli brass music LP. Okay, it came out like in the 70s, and it was the brass sections of the Cleveland Orchestra, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and the Philadelphia Orchestra, and those guys all got together one weekend in some big cathedral church and
Wow.
laid down this entire, one of the greatest brass recordings.
I go to the extremes of being at the Boy Scout Jamboree in 2010, and the Army had a brass quintet playing of tracking down their recordings,
Yeah.
and which were hard to find.
Well, the Navy has a
get
great
them.
brass. Great. The
Well,
Navy has a
all
great.
the service bands have. I mean, I got a buddy who studied with the same teacher as me. You know, for as long as I did, actually, probably even longer. I mean, he's first chair clarinet of the Fort Myers Army Band, which is the, you know,
Right.
Yes.
premier Army band in the whole order.
I really, and I can listen to classical guitar music, flamenco.
Andreas Segovia.
Oh,
Yeah,
I can listen.
Segovia.
I can listen to that.
The Romero family.
Right.
The
Oh,
Romeros years
oh
ago.
man, I can just
As a
listen.
matter of fact, that's, you know, talking about, you know, what are we going to do next? I mean, that I am going to do a program with guitar again. We did one
Great.
a number of years ago.
Classical
It's
guitar.
called Symphony and Salsa, and there's this great guitarist, friend of ours from Connecticut. And I just bumped into him a couple weeks ago. He said, "You know, we gotta have you
him up.
back and
Oh, I just
and
love
do some
classical.
Rodrigo with you
Oh,
with the
Absolutely.
orchestra." And he has all these pop kind of arrangements too, the Malagueña. I mean, we did a whole set with the guy.
I really,
That was
just, I
about
have a
10
thing
years
about
ago.
flamenco. I mean, just classical
Yeah.
stuff. Oh man,
So, you know, but the thing is, in spite of technology, as when you were talking about, being there at that moment. I mean, you're realizing, you know, you can go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston or the Gardner Museum or any place and see some of the world's greatest paintings hanging on a wall, right? Well, we're doing the musical version of it, except we're creating it right in
Right
front of
here,
your
right
eye.
here.
I mean, it's all
Very
brand
true.
new.
Well, the
all
other
over
thing,
again.
the other thing people don't realize, and maybe a lot of people don't know, that when I sit and listen to it, I hear everything, all the harmonic content, all the vibrato, everything that's in that instrument. If I listen to it on a CD breaks it down digitally, so it's not an analog signal anymore, it's a digital signal. So you lose the nuances. You lose absolutely.
Vinyl was better.
Vinyl,
you know,
vinyl is
vinyl's
analog.
making a comeback.
Yeah, vinyl.
My son actually
I know.
Yes.
took our turntable back to Amherst with him a couple of years ago, and he said, we all like listening on
the
vinyl.
reason
I
why-
kept all my vinyl,
The
by the way,
reason
and
why
it's back.
the reason why is because it is a true representation because it's analog. It's not digital.
Okay, now-
When- that's the difference.
Like to keep going. We got a couple of minutes left. Let's let you plug the season.
Right.
What's coming up the rest
We
of the
got
season?
all sorts of great things this year. I mean, you know, again, you know, I had to wait for the whatever inspiration, and then it just kind of came.
Okay.
Holiday Pops on December 12th.
Okay.
The Greater Milford Community Chorus is joining us this year
Which
for
is
the
new.
first time ever.
Okay.
The chorus we've worked with for years. This season was unavailable, so I reached out to the folks at Greater
Okay.
Milford Community Chorus. They were very excited. I mean, we'll do all of the standard favorites that we always do. You know, the Stille Nacht is the penultimate piece of the night. All those things. We're also having Emily Shaner, who was a Milford High School graduate, come
Right.
as a vocal soloist on Holiday Pops.